On the show today, we welcome back Lorrin Maughan, a personal leadership and compassionate accountability coach. Listen in as Stacy and Lorrin talk about how to deal with conflict at work. This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacy Harris.
So welcome back to the show, Lorrin. It's really good to have you back. I love hearing about the work that you're doing. I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today because I think this is something that every single human on the planet has experienced, certainly in their personal lives, but you can't escape it, unfortunately, in the professional environment as well. So today we're going to be talking about, and it's much bigger than this or much more detailed, but we're going to be talking about how to kind of find a fresh new perspective on dealing with conflict at work. It's kind of a rudimentary kind of headline on it, I guess, but can we kind of put it in that bucket?
We can definitely put it in that bucket. Conflict at work and in life, really.
Yeah, I mean, what we're going to be talking about today can definitely be applied both in our professional and our personal lives. You know, one of the things, obviously, in getting ready for the show, you sent over some great information and one of your presentation decks that you share with your clients. And in your bio, we shared that you are a licensed or certified practitioner of the method of called Leading Out of Drama. And one of the things in that deck was that really jumped out on the page for me was drama is the energy vampire. Like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, yes, are you kidding? And as I say it very dramatically, of course, but yes, drama is the energy vampire. And then the extension of that, of course, is that it's in every organization, community, and relationship. So I think people can really resonate with that.
Absolutely. It's the energy vampire. It's the time vampire. It's the financial vampire. You know, drama, yes. Toxic conflict, or the drama that comes from that really has a massive impact on our lives at work and in general.
We're going to definitely go deeper on the drama triangle by Stephen Cartman. We'll definitely get to that. But you had just spoke of, the cost that comes along with drama, and the most obvious being the financial cost, right? So there's some pretty significant dollar signs around what it costs businesses in the U.S., and you actually think that it might even be way bigger than the study that was done some time ago. Is that right?
I do. There was a study that was commissioned by CPP Incorporated. They published the Myers-Briggs type indicator and other instruments like that. And they did a huge study back in 2008 that basically led them to the conclusion that U.S. employees specifically, are costing companies over $359 billion just in terms of the sheer time that they spend resolving or experiencing conflict. So that doesn't even begin to cover things like, sick leave and stress leave and things like that. And given that this was done back in 2008, given the current climate, both economically and politically, I think that generally conflict itself has really escalated as a kind of an ambient noise in the background of our lives. So to think about 2008, $359 billion in losses for U.S. companies, it has to be more than that now.
Absolutely. Well, and that equates to, I think you'd said it's about 3 hours per week. And we may not actually think about it in hour-long chunks, right? But in actual fact, those minutes add up, right? And then if you're looking at 3 hours per week, that's hundreds of hours every single year for one employee. And then you've got two or more employees that are actually involved in that. I mean, it just snowballs from there.
It really does. And the main point there too is it's something that almost all employees spend time figuring out, addressing, trying to resolve conflict.
I mean, we're talking about a time and a money cost there, but you had alluded to the sick leave and the stress leave and the emotional cost or the emotional tax that comes along with that spills over into our personal lives as well.
Very much so.
And you can't really put a dollar amount on that because the ripple effect that bleeds into so many other aspects of our lives is probably immeasurable.
exactly. I think every one of us have, we've had that Sunday night where we start to feel a little sickly. We get that tightness in our stomach or the headache, and we're just like, oh God, I've got to go back and deal with that, whatever it is. Yeah.
The Sunday night blues. Yes. All right. I know that we've got people in their car, or they're going to work, or on the bus, or walking to work right now, and I think we're going to be able to resonate with pretty much everyone on this one today. So let's actually dig into. I want to get into the drama triangle. And I'd mentioned Stephen Kottman earlier. It was a model that was developed by him back in the late 60s. So let's talk about the drama triangle, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into there. But let's start with the triangle and the roles that have been identified in that.
Okay. And, let's start even a little step before that. Like, what is drama? What is drama when it comes to conflict? And really, when we think about conflict, most of the time, it's when people are struggling either internally or with another, with or without awareness, to feel justified about their behavior. So most of us want to be right. Most of us want to feel justified or vindicated in our position about something. And so what tends to happen is because we're driven by that, we start to fall into these unhealthy behaviors, and that's what creates the drama that we're talking about. And Dr. Stephen Kottman, back in, like you said, the 60s, came up with this model for interpersonal dynamics, which is still very relevant today. And it's where we fall into these roles of persecutor, victim, or rescuer. So those are the three corners of the triangle. And the drama is escalated when we actually flip-flop between roles as well. So, for example, I think we're all familiar with the people who offer us unsolicited advice, right? Well-meaning. And I know I've done it myself. We've all been or seen every one of these roles, by the way. So, so this is something that I think we can all resonate with. But the people who give the unsolicited advice, or the people who do something for somebody else, even when they're not asking for help, right? That's when somebody's fallen into that rescuer role, and they're just like, well, you should do it my way. Why don't you just try this, right? And it's not always very helpful. In fact, it's very often not helpful at all. Or the people who influence other people through fear or guilt, right? Or they offer ultimatums like, do it or else, or, you always, you never, those sorts of languages. Those are people who've fallen into the persecutor role at that point. And then the victim role is, surprisingly, I think a lot of people don't realize this, but the victim takes the bullet for somebody else, right? They're the people who do all the work for everybody else. They're the people who would rather compromise than face a conflict. They're the people who avoid asking for what they want. And quite often, in any of those situations, particularly victim and rescuer, when you're in that for long enough, you kind of reach a boiling point and you flip often into persecutor. Mm-hmm. And none of those dynamics are healthy. And, I think a lot of people come to these dynamics with this myth about conflict. Stacy, if I said to you, I say the word conflict, what happens in your body?
Well, it kind of scrunches up because I'm like, ooh, I don't like that.
Right. Most people get a tight stomach, or their throat hurts,
yes,
or a headache, or, and because we've been taught to think of conflict as synonymous with war or aggression or, hurt. Something's going to hurt us. This is a dangerous situation. When really conflict itself is neutral. It's a bit like money, right? Conflict is neutral. It's what you do with it that makes it toxic or positive. Conflict is potential. It's energy potential. And if you really think harder about it, nothing positive happens. Nothing innovative happens in business without conflict. You have to have a spark of ideas. You have to have a dissent of some sort. You have to have somebody pushing against something or wanting to change something, right, in order to innovate and to get better at things. Even fire. One of our fundamental elements, right? You can't have fire without some sort of conflict. You have to spark something against something else. And so when we can reframe it like that and stop thinking of conflict as necessarily a bad thing, start thinking of it as a creative potential, that pushes us into a different mindset altogether.
To take the approach of the fire analogy, right, is that you have to have that explosion in a very positive way, but the explosion of two elements coming together in order to create something positive,
Right.
I think is a great approach. So you talked about the rescuer, the persecutor, the victim, and the roles of, and I think all of us in various roles in our lives, and certainly at work as well, I think we've probably all found ourselves in at least, of course, at least one, if not more, meaning that, depending on what, like you're sitting in the car right now or on the bus or riding your bike to work, like, are you filling any of these roles with certain people that you have within your organization? And how do you become aware of that? Like, what are some of the things that as you go into a situation or you have an interaction with someone that you become aware of what type of role you're in at that moment?
Right. I think some of it comes down to language and behavior. You can recognize the victim by the behaviors of overfunctioning or compromising, all the self-deprecation, putting yourself down, taking the bullet for somebody else, but doing things for other people to your own detriment. And you can look at the environment around victimhood, right? It tends to, people who are sitting in that space have lower confidence, low morale. There's a lot of avoidance in that scenario. So kind of being aware of the behaviors, being aware of the environment there. With a rescuer, the behaviors and the language are things like you should, or why don't you, or have you tried, all those kind of helpful suggestions. You should do it my way, try my way. And the behaviors are that unsolicited advice, that stepping in to just tell somebody else how they should do it, but never actually helping them develop the skills to do it themselves. And the environment that surrounds that tends to be, people start to demonstrate a loss of initiative. They tend to start demonstrating dependence. They quite often start to feel resentful. This is the classic situation of where somebody says, "Oh, I've got a headache," and the person's like, "Well, you should just take that nail out of your head," instead of just saying, "What do you think is causing your headache?" and then having the person discover it themselves and take their own action. So they tend to feel that resentment build up, which will then often push them either into persecutor or back into victim. And then the behaviors around persecutor are, those kind of blaming, shaming, intimidating, condescending activities, right, or behaviors. When we judge people and shame them, when we intimidate them, give them ultimatums. And of course, the environment that results in is an environment of fear and guilt, a lot of secrecy and intimidation. And then, of course, people will either respond to that by persecuting back, so there'll be a clash, or they'll fall into victim. So when we look at those, we have to understand some of the value systems behind that, right? So when we're sitting in persecutor, we're kind of sitting in that I'm okay and you're not okay value system. When we're sitting in victim, we're sitting in I'm not okay and you are, so I'll have to accept what you put on me. And then when we're in rescuer, it's I'm okay and you would be if you just do what I say.
It's interesting because I think you can actually be any of those three throughout the course of your day.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, that's interesting because you're not necessarily 100% always the victim. You're not always 100% the persecutor. I think there's this flow. But you had actually mentioned earlier the conflict happens when you switch in between those.
Yeah, the drama tends to escalate. When you're feeling victimized and you start to build up that resentment, you could flip over into persecutor very quickly. We also jump into different roles with different people. So with some people, we're trying to justify ourselves by being the rescuer and being the expert in inverted commas. With other people, we're being the victim because we're looking to be rescued. So depending on the power dynamics or, just generally the environment around you, you'll find that you may be falling into one of those roles because it serves you in some way. None of us do anything arbitrarily. We're doing it because on some level it serves us. It either serves to justify our position or our belief system, or it gets us a result. And so, being aware of that is the first step to change. Okay, what's the language I'm using? What are the behaviors I'm demonstrating? What kind of environment am I creating around me? And what's the payoff for me? And I think that's really important to know.
Yes, and when we were doing our kind of pre-record conversation, you had talked about the antidote of the drama triangle. And I love this because I love the term antidote because it takes something that we typically think of when it comes to a snake bite, right? What's the antidote? In order to be able to reverse the effects of that. And how can we actually proactively lean into something that's going to provide hopefully a positive result? There's a term that's used when it comes to the antidote of the drama triangle. Do you mind digging into that a little bit more as well?
Sure. So what we're trying to do, and think of the drama triangle is creating a toxic work environment, right? So it's creating all this toxic conflict. And so we need that anti-venom to neutralize the toxins. So what we do is we want to apply a framework of compassionate accountability. And what that means, the definition of compassionate accountability means engaging in positive conflict with the purpose of encouraging personal responsibility while preserving dignity. We really do. We want to lean into this much more emotionally mature place, right? If we think about all of the leadership work being done at the moment, it all comes down to this understanding that leaders and leaders of teams, but also people, employees, as demonstrating their own personal leadership, is this idea of how do we create an emotionally safe or a psychologically safe environment? So Google's people operations team actually spent over 2 years looking at 250 attributes of I think it was 180 teams that they had, and saying, okay, what differentiates an effective team from a non-effective team? And they came up with 5 attributes. Things like dependability, structure and clarity, meaning of work, impact of work, those sorts of things, which make a lot of sense. But one of the things that really stood out was they said effective teams create an environment of psychological safety. And so for me, that's where compassionate accountability comes in. Being able to preserve dignity, being able to create that space of safety while still having positive conflict, leaning into that as a creative force, and then encouraging personal responsibility. And so to that end, we have what we call the compassion skills. And those skills are openness, resourcefulness, and persistence.
The show notes are going to be just a list of nuggets. I love this. Okay, so we're going to talk about now the elements within that compassion cycle. So openness, resourcefulness, and persistence. So let's talk about this because on the curricu.com site, we'll actually have this visual as well. But as folks are listening in, I'd love to be able to kind of take them through audibly of this beautiful circle or cycle that you have. So let's start with openness. Like, I think there's a lot of talk about being open, open to change, open to discussion, open. But what does that really mean?
Right. That's a really, really good question. So this compassion cycle was developed by a company called Next Element Consulting, and they're all behavioral scientists. They're all people who have spent their careers kind of leaning into the behavioral sciences and looking at what makes a strong organizational or team environment. And so that they came up with these skills, and originally I believe that they had called openness vulnerability. And we're getting feedback from companies saying, don't use that word. But since then, obviously, Brene Brown's been doing a lot of her work, and vulnerability has kind of become a little bit more accepted. But they stayed with openness because it's a much broader term. So when we talk about openness as a compassion skill, we're looking at creating connection, right? So openness through being self-aware, disclosing our agenda for the conversation, so disclosing what we're looking to get out of this, validating the other person and having empathy with them, but then also being vulnerable, having the courage to say, wow, I'm feeling pretty anxious about talking about this right now, because it's really important to me that we come to an agreement, and I don't want to compromise my ethics. And so in that one sentence, I kind of took us through a little bit of all three of those things, right? I'm feeling a little anxious about having this conversation. That's me being open, right? And I want us to have a better interaction. So that's disclosing my motives. Moving into resourcefulness, I'd then say, how do you think that we could have a more productive meeting? Or, how do you think that I could say something in a way that's not going to spark disagreement straight away? Because I'm really committed. So now I'm moving into persistence. I'm taking responsibility and I'm setting my boundaries. I'm really committed to us having this conversation and coming to an agreement without stepping on either you or me. How does that feel for you? And so I pushed us back into open.
And that goes back to the win-win, right? That everyone, with the goal of walking out feeling that everyone was heard, right? But they didn't have to compromise their ethics or their values, or people could easily fall back into those three roles of victim, rescuer, or persecutor. And it's really going in with this approach starts off without anyone feeling like they have to put their defenses up, right, or that they're going to, as you said, get have someone tread on them. So I love that, and I feel like I need to. I'm going to get the transcription of this particular interview, and I'm going to pull out a couple of those things that you just mentioned, because I think just even being in a position to be able to practice that type of approach to a conversation, you'll only get better at it, and it'll get easier.
Yes, and that's a really important point. You said practice. These are skills, right? So the drama roles are kind of default positions that we fall into. The compassion skills are going to take some awareness. They're going to take some mindfulness. They're going to take practice. But if we hold on to the idea that what we're working towards is an environment of safety, curiosity, accountability, and respect, we're working towards that I'm okay, you're okay model, then we can start practicing. And honestly, I've stopped conversations halfway through and gone, oh, sorry, I didn't, that didn't start off the way I wanted it to. Can we do that again? And people are getting used to me doing that now, where I'm like, whoa, hang on, can we start over? Because this is really important, and I want to make sure that I do it right. I want to make sure that I'm coming in here. I immediately just jumped to an assumption there, or I immediately just judged you on something. And then, do you mind if we just start that over? And because for me, part of my disclosing of agenda is I'm working on these skills. I want to get better at them. And I'm not just going to let this continue to go where it's going. I'm going to stop it because I just became mindful of the fact of what I did. So can we stop? Can we start again? And you always start it open. So it doesn't matter where you are, right, or what you're encountering. You always come back to that openness. You always come back to that, okay, I this is my agenda. This is how I'm feeling. And remember also that a lot of the drama triangle comes from these two myths, these very foundational myths that human beings love to buy into. And that's the myth of, you can make me feel something, and I can make you feel something. And that's not true. You can trigger a response in me, but honestly, I'm the one who decides how I feel.
Right, yeah.
Right? So I can choose to sit with that triggered reaction, or I can choose to move forward. So if you say, I love ice cream, somebody might say, oh my God, that's offensive. How could you love ice cream? I'm vegan. Don't do that, right? Somebody else might say, oh, I love ice cream too, and get all happy about it. It's like the fact that you can say one thing to 3 or 4 different people and have 3 or 4 different people react differently is evidence that you can't make them feel something, right? You can be a stimulus and they can respond to that, but it's their choice in terms of do I sit with that triggered reaction or do I move into something else? So you could say, well, I have a completely different opinion about ice cream, or, that just made me think of something and now I'm sad. Or, that made me remember a party that I had and now I'm happy. But it wasn't,
right.
You didn't make me feel that. You triggered something in me that then I responded to with it. And so just remembering that, the fact that we can't give our power to somebody else,
right,
because they don't have it anyway. So when somebody's persecuting us and we're falling into victim, we're falling prey to that myth that they can make me feel something, right? So we can say, hey, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now, and I'd like to have a more constructive conversation. So do you mind if I take a time out and come back to you? Because I'm really committed to hearing you. Is that okay? So can you see what I just did there again? Openness, I feel overwhelmed and I want to have a constructive conversation. So move into resourcefulness with a suggestion, like, do you mind if I take a time out, or if there's another way that we can move back into a more constructive place? Because this is really important that we finish this in a good space, and so you kind of keep the cycle, the compassion cycle moves. That's the other thing, is it moves. So you're always, you start with one and you move through it. And you can move through these cycles 3 or 4 times in as many sentences. And something that I learned when I first started doing this was also quite often, I need to have this conversation internally before I even start having it externally.
Key. Yes.
So, right? What stories am I telling myself? Oh my God, my boss just called me into his office. Bam! I'm in a drama role, right? Maybe I've fallen into victim. Oh my God, I'm probably in trouble. It's a terrible thing, whatever, right? And then I need to say, okay, wait a second. What am I feeling? What other times has he called me into his office? Were they all bad? Was this a terrible thing? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he's calling me in to give me some good kudos, right? I'm committed to just going in open-minded and hearing what they have to say. And so now I'm feeling better, and I'm going to move forward into that. And so sometimes having that conversation internally can set us up to have it externally in a much more positive way.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Having that conversation with yourself internally, especially if it's an anxiety generating conversation that you think you're going to, or situation that you're going to be going into, and understanding too, or being aware that before you go into that situation, what are you feeling and what are the triggers? I think the term trigger is really key here, because we all come to the table with our own baggage, right? Like, we've known that for a while now. What are the terms, or what is the behavior that triggers a certain emotion in me that may not be constructive? And how can I be open to hearing or feeling in that particular situation, and not lead down a path that will either make me feel stuck or that can continue to go through that cycle. So that self-awareness piece and the practicing in your head, and then, even practicing with family and friends before you go into those certain situations, is just a part of the muscle building, right? The training and the development that you need to do to be able to handle them differently. So I think that's great. And we'll actually have more information about this. Lorrin, fantastic. I love this. And I feel like we need to have the whole transcript available for our listeners so they can actually pull out those nuggets and start practicing in the mirror, when they're brushing their teeth in the morning.
Or they can call me and we can
There
coach.
we go.
Happy to do that.
Yes. Lorrin's always willing to work with new clients, and you've got some really fantastic results that you've heard from your clients that have actually started incorporating this and in practicing it into their careers. One of the questions that I know is going to be coming up, because we have listeners that, they may actually start listening because they're thinking about their own career journey, but they may also be in a position of leadership, right? As a manager of employees, or a manager of managers, or senior leadership, executive leadership. So they may have multiple hats on. But Lorrin, if I am an individual contributor, I don't have anyone reporting into me, I don't have a team of people, but I am faced with situations where I am one of those three roles, right? Rescuer, victim, or persecutor. How can I influence compassionate accountability at work if I'm not in a quote unquote leadership role?
Beautiful question. First of all, I believe every one of us is in a position of leadership, whether it's leadership of a team or simply just thought leadership. We all have the opportunity to lead by example. And so for me, a lot of this comes down to, you can apply this model to anything. I've applied it to having conversations with my family about would they please eat something that is more in line with my belief systems when they come to my house to eat, right? I've had a client who was working for a small business locally here, and her manager had really kind of just made some assumptions and taken a bit of advantage of her willingness to jump in and just pick up the slack. And you could see there she was probably falling into a little bit of a victim there, taking the bullet for other people. And it was building some resentment for her. So she went into her manager and she said, I used the compassion skills. I went in and I said, I'm starting to feel a little resentful because I'm in this situation where I find myself consistently stepping up to take on more than I should. And I'd like to reset that. Right? So is there, can you help me work through this? Is there a way that, I'm good at what I do. I don't want to burn out. And I also want you to understand that when this consistently happens, it is building this resistance in me and this sense of angst. And, so she went in, she set her boundaries. She said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I am committed to continuing to be a good, strong team player, and I'm not going to do everybody else's work for them anymore. How do you feel about that? And she was nervous. She was in an admin role, and she was going to the guy who owned the company in an at-will state. So, she said, I'm nervous to have this conversation with you because I don't know how it's going to end up, and I need to let you know that I'm feeling resentful, right? I've done really good work in the past, and I do step up a lot, and I'm not going to keep doing it ad infinitum. And she said to me, I would have been happy with an apology. And what actually happened was her boss said, wow, you're right, and I'm sorry, and gave her a very substantial raise, almost a quarter of her salary, an enormous raise in her base income. And, because he said, I value you. And it's time that I stepped up and showed that. And so he responded literally with the compassion skills himself. I'm sorry, I regret that we've been taking advantage of you. And I have an idea for something that I can do to recognize your contributions, right? I'm going to give you some extra money. And I'm also going to be more aware of this tendency that we have to just keep loading you up and stop doing it. And so she was blown away. She said, I was so nervous to walk into that conversation. I had another client who called me who was on a contract. And he said, look, I'm a contractor. I'm 1099. And the company that I'm working with, they're starting to try and tell me how to do my job, which is not in the scope of my contract, and I don't know how to deal with it. So we worked through this, and he went back to them and started applying the compassion skills, setting his boundaries, being very clear about, I know this is a risky conversation to have, and I'm going to have it anyway because I think it would behoove both of us to understand the parameters of the contract. Here's where we've worked really well before, so we're building on success. How do you think that we can keep doing that without this micromanagement? Because that is not something that's in my contract, and therefore it's not something that I'm going to accept. And so working through that compassion cycle a few times, it helped them become more aware of a pattern of behavior without blaming, right? Without pointing fingers, and also engage in a conversation about how do we make this work, right? How can we both lean in and make this something that really kind of builds off of the initial success that we had? And from that, interestingly enough, he started moving internally through this conversation into a place of, what do I really want to do with my career? What do I really, why am I in this contract? What am I trying to learn from it? And through a couple of, I guess it was almost maybe 6 weeks, it wasn't very long, ended up moving into a role that he had previously thought was his 5-year goal.
Wow.
Because he started just becoming more aware of where he was, so that awareness of his emotional state, that awareness of his agenda, the resourceful state that he was moving into, so that curiosity, well, why can't I? I wonder if, maybe, what if we tried this, right? And then into that persistence, what am I going to take responsibility for? What is not negotiable for me? Where are my boundaries? And continuing to work through that. He ended up in a VP role, loving it.
Wow.
and bringing these skills to his team, which I can tell you right now is going to change their lives.
I love that. And ultimately, in going through that experience himself, right? And obviously he had a goal, a short-term goal, right? This isn't working for me. Something needs to change. Obviously that's the positive side of that ripple effect, right? The work that he had done internally and then started having those external conversations has now led for him to be in a leadership role in order to be able to integrate more compassionate accountability directly into his organization. I love that.
Absolutely.
So working with Lorrin Maughan, as an individual ends up helping way more people. I love that.
Or taking accountability for changing your behaviors.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and that knowing that it's also not going to be a quick fix, right? And it does comes down to practice and the willingness to actually be persistent.
It is definitely practice, and that awareness of our own tendencies. I know with my mom, for example, I'm going to fall into rescuer every time. So, Mom, you need to do this. What have you,
yes.
And so knowing that, I really have to stay very conscious on those conversations and refrain from just telling her what
Falling
to do.
into that again. Yes, because it's easy to fall back into it.
Very much so.
Yeah. Lorrin, I love this conversation. I feel like this interview is something that people can keep coming back to, right? And if you need that reminder of, okay, wait, what did Lorrin say again about that? Or what role am I in when I interact with this particular person, and how can I change that? How can I turn it into a position where I don't feel like the victim, or I feel like I'm, stepping into that persecutor role? I don't know that when we first started talking about this, I was like, Lorrin, I have been all of these. I am all of these, and this feels gross.
When I first did my certification for this, we do a drama inventory, basically, like what is your predilection for each of these roles. And I was horrified to find how often I fall into victim, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I can't stand that. Like, I hate victims, blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, I start persecuting myself right away. But what it did for me was really kind of just open my eyes to my own behaviors. And I'm like, what am I getting out of behaving like that? What's the payoff?
Yeah.
And then from there, being able to take it out. And there's Nate Regier, who's the basically the mastermind behind this at Next Element. He wrote a book called Conflict Without Casualties. And in that book, he talks about all of this. And it's I would call that, a field guide for moving into a more emotionally mature, compassionately accountable world.
Awesome. I love it. And we'll have a link to his book on the website too. So at thecareerq.com. Lorrin, this has been amazing. I love talking to you. And just because you're one of the people in our network that bring sunshine to my day, just to talk, and especially on a rainy day. It sounds like it's rainy both here in Seattle and in Wichita.
It is.
You've got a little Seattle roll in there with you today.
I do. I have a little Seattle rolling through.
But like we've talked about so much today, what is one key takeaway that our listeners can actually take with them today as they walk into the office, as they walk into their business, as they walk into any interaction where they feel like they're one of these three roles? What is the one thing that people can start doing today?
I think the one thing is to remind themselves, I'm okay, and so is everybody else. We're all doing our best. And to lean forward into that curiosity and respect. And I wonder what would happen. I wonder how the world could be different if I created a safer space for people to come forward. And I can guarantee if we do that, we're going to start seeing so much more engagement, so much more cohesion, so much more effectiveness. I'm okay, you're okay. Let's stay curious. Let's keep it safe and respectful. And let's all stick with the accountability.
Compassionate accountability. I love it.
Very much.
I love it. Lorrin, thank you again. This has been fantastic. Shamwari Coaching and Consulting. You'll be able to find links to how to get in touch with Lorrin and the fantastic work that she does with her clients. If you're interested in becoming a client, definitely reach out. And Lorrin, you're doing fantastic work, and we so appreciate you taking the time out to be able to share this with our listeners. We would love to have you back on the show. We will definitely be hitting you up in the future.
My pleasure, Stacy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lorrin.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media in the lovely Seattle, Washington.